Cloth in VRChat. Turns out it is possible. If you've ever tried to use the cloth component in VRChat before, you've probably run into the issue where using any sort of collider will cause your avatar to just get thrown into the air randomly, usually when there's some kind of movement on the y-axis. But anyway, we figured out how to fix that. Basically, the TLDR is that for any collider you use, you set it to be a trigger collider, which will prevent it from actually colliding with other colliders. The cloth component will still work fine though, because it ignores the Unity physics system and just directly uses the colliders. So I'll just walk through quickly how to set up an avatar that has some sort of cloth on it. For the Unity cloth component to work, you need to have whatever you want to be in the cloth to be in a separate mesh. So right now this model is separated by material, and what we'll do is take all these vertices that are part of the cloth here and save them into a vertex group so that after we join the vertices, we can get them back out. So let's see here, join meshes, and now we have just all one big mesh, but what we can do is select this and then separate that to a new mesh. One thing that some people aren't familiar with in Blender is that there's this convenient spacebar menu that allows you to search for some kind of action. So here we want to separate, and then you don't have to remember all the hotkeys. So that's it, we've got our separate mesh here. I've already gone and exported this to Unity, so let's just jump over there right now. So there's the same mesh. We've got our main body and then the cloth here. So we can start by adding a cloth component. And I'll just set some values on here that I think will probably work all right. You should take a look at the documentation and just experiment with the values to see what works. These velocity scale things behave a little differently in Unity than they do in the game, so it'll take a bit of fine-tuning to get exactly the behavior you want. That's it, we've set up the cloth, and if we run this, we'll see that the cloth just falls. So that's because we don't have any constraints set up yet. Kind of similar to weight painting, constraints basically take some of the virtual particles that are used to deform the mesh and prevent them from moving a certain amount. Probably the most convenient thing to do is just set all these top ones to not move at all. One thing that's important to keep in mind is there's this convenient manipulate back faces option, which lets you select these particles that are on the other side without having to manually do it all. So that's probably good for this one. Sometimes you'll need to set a max distance for some of the other particles that is not just 0. That can be really helpful if it's glitching and you want very specific ranges for parts of the mesh. So let's run that again, and we'll see that, okay, it doesn't fall, but it does clip through the leg. It's a little more obvious, probably if we, let's say, rotate this. There's no collision there. So we can set that up by adding some capsules. So I like to usually add them in a separate game object that just makes it a little easier to manipulate. So we'll call that left leg capsule. And then we can go add our capsule component and just set the size on that. So let's see, 0.0007-ish, that should do. And as I mentioned before, the important thing for the cloth component to work in VRChat is to set this as a trigger, and that'll prevent it from colliding with anything else. So let's just move that into place. Generally, you want to have a little bit of extra capsule that's outside of the object that you want. This just prevents any sort of clipping artifacts. So let's add one more to the hips. And same thing, trigger, make that a little smaller. That should do. So now we can go back into the cloth component, set up the colliders, and run it again. So it looks like there's no clipping. Let's try rotating the leg, and you can see that the cloth now moves.